Hey, what's up, y'all? And of course, welcome back to another Alternative Factuals video. In general, like I said, a lot of shows have just been kind of dwindling down in terms of black content for TV shows. So I made an announcement. So this week we're going to kind of be following up with that. So to start it off, I'm going to start with, something that everyone's familiar with in terms of name. But then I want you to leave comments down below and the suggestions and stuff like that in the community tab. So that way I can kind of cover things that you guys want to hear. If I feel like most people are too inconsistent, what I'll do is I'll put up polls. I'll put up multiple story arcs between DC or Marvel, and I'll cover it, and it'll kind of be like sort of kind of comics explain style, but not really. Now, this is my perspective, and I'll put my own little spin or twist to it and throw in my little opinions and all that stuff. So before I do all that, be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe so you don't miss these retellings, especially for characters that you know and love. And without further ado, let's kind of just dive into today's video. So today we're going to be covering Black Lightning Volume 2, issue numbers 1 through 3. So basically this is how this is going to work. Depending on the story arc, I will be covering 2 to 3 issues of that story if it's like a 13 issue run or 14 issue run or something like that. Especially if it's a really substantially long run, I'm going to cover multiples, and I'll let you know which multiples I'm going to be covering in that video. So in this video, I'm going to be covering Black Lightning Volume 2, numbers 1 through 3 in terms of issues. And then I'll do the same thing, 3 through 6, 6 through 9, all the way up until we get to the last. I think this one is for 13 issues. So this is Volume 2 that took place in 1995. And I'm going to be covering pretty much the OG Black Lightning. This is kind of coming off the back end of the 1970s Black Lightning story. So this is obviously Volume 2. So let's kind of just dive into the story. So this kind of starts off in what they call the Brick City. This is one of the craziest cities, obviously, because one, they're slinging drugs in this area. It's much like how you saw in the TV show where Freeland, it was very heavily involved in gang and drug and pretty much violent crime and activities such as like that. But what's very interesting is that Black Lightning is already prevalent in this neighborhood, because you see that in these public housing complexes, you see the crime rate is rising, but Black Lightning has come and really he has started to clean up town. Like, he knows like this is something that he must do in order for this neighborhood to survive. So the first thing he does is actually he hits the crack house that's operated by the gang Brothers Who Rule. Now, forgive the name, I guess it's the 90s. You already know the names weren't that creative. Think of Power Rangers, teenagers with attitude. Like, come on, are you for real about that one? But it's the 90s. The name is a little questionable, but quickly, the mayor's office sees that Black Lightning's, what he's been doing in the community is starting to gain traction extremely quickly. 1, he's black. 2, he's a black dude with powers. 3, he's black. So you already know anything that involves black people is going to travel fast in the news, especially a black dude with powers. But what we see when he kind of goes back to his Jefferson Pierce civilian kind of identity, he basically witnesses 2 gangbangers driving throughout town in a suburban street, and the car is just like completely out of control and basically hits a woman and the young child. But unfortunately, Jeff tries to administer aid, but they end up passing anyway, which at this point you can tell, even the way how it's drawn, the facial expressions, he is pissed, he's upset, and everything in his mind is just like, he felt like he could have did more, but unfortunately he didn't. So the evening changes and he goes back into being Black Lightning, and he meets with his informer, who tells him that gangs are basically running scared and they're basically relocating to the east side, and Black Lightning is causing these shifts in the criminal underworld just by his physical presence alone. So when we actually get to issue 2, after that night pretty much passed, there's no absolute amount of time that passed, but we do know the mayor is making an effort to kind of support the community, the schools, Black Lightning, what he's doing. But the second he goes to the school in which Jefferson Pierce is working at, he hears 2 gunshots, and I think it might be 3, but 2 to 3 gunshots. And then they walk in and they see Jefferson is talking down a kid who basically shot another kid for something that is completely negligible, supposedly disrespecting his family. And then Jefferson's telling him, this is stupid. Why would you want to do that in a school? Like, there are better ways to resolve this issue. And then the second he does that, you know, obviously police officer Henderson, who in the comic books is a white dude, comes up behind him, disarms him, and pretty much he gets arrested. Now, what makes this kind of a troubling part of the story is because even though this was in the 90s was a lot rougher compared to like 2020 or 2019, even 2018. You know, things were a lot more prevalent in these suburban neighborhoods. One, mostly because we didn't have the resources in our neighborhoods to make sure kids didn't resort to violence, that kids didn't resort to the gang life activity. Most of them did that not because they sought to be terrible people, but because they had nothing else better to do, one. And then two, they had to support their families in some way, shape, or form because, believe it or not, the crack epidemic was in the 1980s, and a lot of it did transition heavily into the 90s. So it was definitely like a decade of pure mayhem, and this comic is definitely a reflection of that. So we see he disarms him. Basically what happens is Jefferson uses his powers, because he's at this point, I believe he's still using the belt. And then at that point, he used a little bit of his powers to zap his hand so that way he would let go, and the kid can basically let go of the gun. Henderson will be perfectly fine, and then no one else has to get hurt, and no one got killed because of his small intervention. Now you can tell Henderson is just in general very frustrated because he wants to do the right thing, but he sees like things like this happening in school is absurd. But this is where things get really juicy, actually. So in this issue of volume 2 of Black Lightning, we actually get to see the first appearance of Painkiller. Painkiller supposedly is some average dude who actually was really in shape. He wasn't necessarily enhanced, at least not, it wasn't really directly stated he was enhanced, but ultimately he was this really absurdly powerful dude, and he was actually brought into the loop by the gang. And remember, that gang's name was what was that corny name they gave themselves? Brothers Who Rule? Like, yeah, nah, that they could have kept all that, but he was brought into the loop by Brothers Who Rule because they felt like that was their response to Black Lightning. He basically announced himself to the gang as Painkiller. You see, he has like the RX symbol on his arm. He has like, you know, these tubes and needles that obviously kind of correlates with his name because he paralyzes his prey. That's what he would call them, paralyzes them. And then they wouldn't feel any pain, but at the end of the day, because they're paralyzed, they can't run and they can't escape, and basically he gets to kill them relatively easily. So that's pretty much how issue 2 ends. But then we transition to issue 3, which I'm going to kind of spoil it a little bit. This is where they kind of fight, and unfortunately we only see Painkiller for one issue. That's issue 2 and issue 3. And that's pretty much about a wrap. Actually, no, I'm lying. You see him in 2, you see him in 3, and I believe he does carry over to 4 because I think he initially does beat Black Lightning, but I think they got a rematch. But don't hold me to that, so we're gonna cover it right now. So this issue kind of starts off with just Black Lightning trying to get information. So he doesn't know like exactly where the gangs are moving because we already know, like I said, they're moved to the east side. So now they're no longer on the west side area, in which he's mostly been monitoring because of all the houses that he already done cracked down on. So he's transitioning through getting information from a lot of the snitches, a lot of people who are, you know, intaking these drugs that they're supposedly buying from these gangs, and he's getting information. So at this point, you see like he's trying to figure out a strategy how to kind of take down these groups of people, but also he sees that sometimes too, like, it's not as black and white when he's kind of conversing with his informants and with people who are helping him kind of develop these strategies as well. But the police seem to be in his corner because he is talking with one police officer, and basically we do know this does take place in the greater DC universe because we get a mention of Gotham City and a bat signal. So he's talking to the cop and he's talking to an informant, but they lead him to a house in which he sees clearly all these other, you know, massive drug kingpins who are basically functioning out of this singular gang, basically different sets within his gang. He takes them out relatively easy, and for the most part he moves on, and then he lets Painkiller know he's gonna just, you know, what he represents. Because at this point, the leader of this particular set, or pretty much the overall leader of the gang in this area, is pretty much telling Painkiller, what are you doing? Why aren't you attacking him? But one thing we see about Painkiller, he's very observant and he watches, he pays attention. He sees how Black Lightning functions and operates, which is pretty much why when we do see him the next time and they actually fight, yeah, he gives him pretty good run for his money, despite the fact that, like I said, officially he was not deemed as like this meta-human. But we quickly go back to the schools for a brief second and we realize, like I said, this neighborhood is just high on tensions. A lot of these kids are very heavily involved in gangs and drugs and dealing in the neighborhood anyway. And that's just, you know, a nice little, I guess, reflection of the situation where despite Black Lightning trying to prevent these gangs from entering the school, it's still very much prevalent in the school. And, you know, the issue is not so much the kids themselves, but the neighborhood. You know, you have community policing, things that can be done to proactively, you know, make sure these kids get the help that they need as well as their families. But it all starts with improving the neighborhood, and that's what he's gonna have to do. So same thing kind of transpires. We get back to the drug house, we get back to Painkiller, we get back to them having a conversation basically about what they're gonna do to take out Black Lightning, what they're gonna do to transition some of these drugs and some of these weapons to different warehouses because they don't want their operation to be interrupted. So that's one of the main concerns that this gang has when it comes to Black Lightning in this whole scenario. As well as the mayor, he's pretty much concerned about this as well, but he feels like the police aren't necessarily doing their job to the best of their abilities and that he shouldn't have to rely on basically Black Lightning. But unfortunately, he feels like this whole task force that he's developed on these crack houses is basically just like a band-aid situation, and he feels like it's quickly escalating and getting out of hand, and that the cops need to do something immediately, something to really bring down the violence in these neighborhoods. And then, like I said, we circle back around to Black Lightning. Now, Black Lightning is doing what he does, hitting the strip, trying to get information, trying to do everything he can. He runs into these group of people who happen to be, I guess, off the subsets of this gang, and then guess who shows up behind him ready for the smoke? And that is Painkiller. He pulls up, they get into a whole huge massive fight, and I'm not gonna lie, like back in the day, even though the art may not be like super appealing to me because, you know, this is really old art for the most part, I do like how things are depicted here. You see that Black Lightning is like they're toying with each other, they're testing each other out, seeing what they can do, and it's like this even exchange of back and forth. Despite the fact that Black Lightning is using energy-based abilities, you see that Painkiller is no joke. He is someone where if he did not take the time to make sure, you know, like if he didn't take precautions, Black Lightning could have very much have been killed that day. But the police arrive just in time, and then they start, really I won't say start, but continue fighting, and they're going and going and going, and then next thing you know, the police kind of intervene at some point, and then Black Lightning's kind of taken out for a moment, and then the police intervene, and then at that point they start shooting at Black Lightning, and that's pretty much how the issue ends. So round one goes to Painkiller for the most part, and he is not a joke. He is extremely powerful. So in the TV show, even though Khalil was relatively young, if he actually took the time to dive into his powers and really explore the totality of his strength, his ability, his agility, and the uses of his poison the way that the Painkiller protocol did, he would be no joke, and he would be something that most metahumans would have to fear. But let me know what you think about the first 3 issues of Black Lightning Volume 2, 1995. Let me know what I think, and let me know any other comments you want me to comics you want me to cover in the comments down below. And if you're new to the channel, please be sure to like, share,